Okay, welcome. My name is Max. You said correctly my second name. Thank you for that. I'm from Agoda, working there around 4.5 years. I started as a senior engineer in Agoda. I was one of the founders of machine learning team, and after 1 year I switched to manage a mobile app team, and I'm doing it since then. So I have a pleasure of seeing Agoda app team growing from 15 people to almost 100, and it's hell of a story, and I'll share some of it. I think first of all, I don't speak Thai. Sorry for that. I would do it lecture in Thai gladly. But one of the problems I have is I speak usually very fast, and I'll do my best to speak slower. But let's do a game where if you feel that you're losing me, just raise your hand, and if I see hands, I will slow down. Okay, so something like this. Okay, so let's start, right? So what I want to talk about is basically, as was said before, I want to show some information about the company, and then I want to tell a story of how we use automation, and not only automation, to solve one of, I think, interesting challenges. So let's start. First, few words about Agoda. So Agoda is one of the biggest OTAs in Asia. OTA is online travel agency, and we are part of Booking Holding. Booking Holding is a group of companies, and it's actually one of the world's largest online travel businesses with a cap of over $100 billion. We have 3,000 employees worldwide of 70 nationalities, and about a third of these people, around 1,000, are in technology, which includes engineers and QA, some security people, etc. Right? We have more than 40 offices in the world, but Bangkok is our headquarters, so all technology except just 2 very small teams located in Bangkok right now. We have more than 2 million properties in, that you can buy on Agoda, right? We are selling accommodation, so as a company that sells accommodation and want to be a real world player, we're spending a lot of time enrolling more and more properties. And when I joined, when I joined Agoda 5 years ago, it was maybe a quarter of that. So, we'll keep growing and giving you guys where to stay. Agoda products, Agoda front-end products support 38 languages. And 50 currencies, because people all over the world want to enjoy our services. It's important. Of course, you can understand it affects, how we need to develop our front-end products, right? And just one other thing about Agoda, nice fact, more than $7 billion in transaction a year, and growing very nice 2 numbers year over year. I cannot share exactly, but we're doing well. Now a few similar words about Agoda application. So I'm proud to say that the Agoda application is one of fastest growing parts of the business. It's in very high 2 digits. I cannot share the numbers, but like very high 2 digits year over year growth. Our application has very high, in my opinion, review scores on stores, 4.7 on iOS, 4.6 on Android, and we have editors shows on Android. We all of us are very proud of that. We feel super proud delivering great product to our customers. We switched to some time ago to weekly releases. We have a release of application every week. This is basically will be one of core areas, so I'll talk a lot about this in the lecture. Few other interesting points, I hope interesting. So we have more than 300 active experiments on application right now. I just checked yesterday in back office. What is experiment? Experiment, every feature we live on application, we run as A/B test because we want to understand the impact of every feature we are doing. This is how we grow Agoda. And we have more than 300 of those running right now on application in latest release. And we roughly release 40, more or less, new experiments every week, right? So this is more or less the scale and amount of features we operate in. I mean, some of these experiments are small, some of them are crazily complex, so it's a mix. Our app is native, mostly Swift and Kotlin. So with Swift we started some time ago. Most of the code is already in Swift. With Kotlin we are writing all new features in Kotlin, so it's catching up, but still not half, but close. Same as Agoda, same as any other front-end product, with our app supports 39 languages and all the currencies, and mostly it affects us in the sense that we have to support RTL. For those who don't know, RTL is right-to-left languages support. For example, I'm coming from Israel. In my language, you write from right to left, not from left to right. So all your layout is basically mirrored right, to look native to you. So it's non-trivial task. We spent some time last year to make sure that it's easy to develop RTL support out of the box. If you want, I'll talk about it another time. It was an interesting challenge as well. And of course, I think that the thing I'm most proud of, in my team, it's the team itself. Almost 100 kick-ass developers. They're making my day challenging every day, and that's why I love coming to work, I think. And you will see some of them today. I hope you will enjoy, same as me. Okay, so if we're talking about automation, let's see some numbers, right? So I think what I want to show is that automation is important and it pays off. For example, some data points, okay? We have 15,000 unit tests on each platform, okay? And we have 900 UI tests on each platform, okay? So if you think about it, like, I don't know how many of you even write UI tests, but running UI tests, let's say on one machine, it's around, or if you will need to run 900 UI tests on one machine, it's around maybe 20 hours of run. Okay, so it's non-trivial task at all to run this. Now, what we need to do is, since we do around 100 PR merges a week, we need to run this regression more than 100 times a week, right? And one of the interesting challenges that we worked on, and it's also things I'm touching in this lecture, is that we managed to run full regression today in just 30 minutes. Okay, so all the tests that I mentioned above are running in 30 minutes. A lot of tooling and a lot of work. It also has some, it makes tests it makes it too easy to write tests. So it also has disadvantages. I'll talk about it a little bit at the end. And I think like the key point of this lecture, I think that like the way you really utilize all of this automation is at the end. We need to do weekly release, and we want to release like a Swiss clock. Every Monday, unless it's a holiday, right? So today we got the situation, and this is the topic of my presentation mostly, that we release our application full sign-off with full regression, and everyone is happy with it in just 1 hour. Okay, so basically all these 40 features that were merged during the week, you sign all of them just in 1 hour on Monday, click submit button in each one of the stores, and your application goes live. Yes, as an example, you can see on the right, I just show you history in the store, so you can really see that there is version every week, right? I'm not lying. I think this year we didn't miss even 1 week, so it's really correct. Now, another example, it doesn't have to be, automation doesn't need to help you only in development, right? For example, managing store content is also a good area to apply automation, right? So here on the right, you can see the screenshot of our page in iTunes, right? So in App Store, so basically all of it is generated by automatic content, right? There is no manual work at all to generate anything on this page. So to support that, like on both stores, right? So to support that, we have 1,200 images that we need to generate. And this doesn't include only the screenshot of the application. It includes also putting them inside frame, as you can see here, and generating all of this, right? Very nice solution developed in the team. You have to maintain like 400 strings. That includes all translations that you need to upload, etc. It's so basically this is it right now. I think the interesting part is that each one of the stores is like generated fully with just one command line. You run command line, and it's all there. And I think the most interesting part for me, at least, because we're all there to grow our business and get bonuses at the end of the day. So it requires zero interaction from developers, right? So all of this work is today done by designers and content team. They just change things in some back offices, and these things are uploaded to the store without any interaction from us. Now, another example where you can use automation is also in later stage, right? I mean, when your app is already production, you can still, enjoy from having interesting automated solutions. So as an example here, you can see very strange snapshot of our homepage. You will never see it on your device, but basically what it shows is special mode that we enabled, where I can see IDs of the strings from back office, right? And basically every content guy can switch application into this mode, go to back office, change the string, and then this string will automatically roll out to production to all versions of app, and you can, and of course it is experiment. We don't do changes without experiments in Agoda, right? So basically, few clicks of the button, and the translation team or whatever copywriting team starts checking new copies, checks the conversion rate. No developers works involved. So at first I thought to discuss, to like deep dive on all three of those, but actually I decided to talk only about the release process, right? Now, if you will want to know, how anything else in our team works, feel free to chat to me after that in the booth. I can deep dive to like code level on any of these ones. Okay, so let's talk about fixing releases, right? This is the story that I decided to chat about, and I think the story is like, in one sentence, we went from releases that took a week or even more to just 1 hour, right? And it was non-trivial. And I want to share with you how we did it, and maybe maybe you'll be impressed, maybe not, but maybe it will help you in life, right? So that's why we're here, right? So first of all, let's discuss what was 2 years ago on Agoda app, right? So in Q4 2016, a version release cycle looked like this. Product decides which features we want to share in the next release. It was a lot of discussions, business like a roadmap, etc., etc. So they come to you and say, you need to develop these fast features, this is next release, okay? And then they, basically we negotiate a date when all of these features should be ready, we develop, we test, we merge, things break, we test, and then finally we say, okay, we are ready. Now, of course, last merges start coming, and then we start running their full regression, okay? So we run regression, it's mostly manual. We run it, we discover tons of features, tons of issues, like crashes, whatever, some features don't work. We fix these issues, and then we run regression again, and then we discover more issues, etc. So we go like this in a loop. Eventually, when we're finished, we submit to store, right? So I'm pretty sure that many of you do this. Maybe your application is smaller, so it takes much less time for you. For us, basically, once you start decide that you are done with developing features, it would usually take week plus of whole team to release, right? So of course, the good part about this process that it's beautiful. Waterfall, it was invented 40 years ago or 50 years ago, right? Nothing interesting to do here. And Agile, by the way, just do waterfall in a loop, so you can say that it's even Agile approach. And then the disadvantages are also clear. One issue blocks everyone, right? So let's say you're running regression and then you have a problem. Like you cannot release up if it crashes or if feature is broken and you already promised it to everyone, right? So like we have to stop and fix everything. Yes, you can release some developers to work on the future things, but it's very not efficient because in a second you will need to run regression again, right? As you may guess, basically this whole process put us in situation where we always were late, right? So we promise some date, and then as always, developers, when they commit to date, they're late on the date, and then you add extra week and a half to just release the feature, so it was a pain. And I think one of the other things, at least that bothers me, maybe other people less, since I'm responsible for overall quality of application, is that this whole process is very risky in the sense of hotfix. I release tons of complex features, and then they start crashing in production. And then back then it's like, on Android it's easy, but on iOS it's like 2-3 days to approve new fix. So I sometimes, when it was very, very complex features, had trouble sleeping at night. So, it sounds like relatively horrible process, right? And we wanted to make it better. But before we make it better, we need to decide how to make it better, right? I mean, at the end, everyone releases this way, and we need to do something a bit different, right? So, in general, what, all I'm showing here is that you need to, when everything sucks, before you make everything amazing, it doesn't happen overnight. So you really need to think carefully and choose your battles, okay? So, how do we choose our battles in Agoda? Basically, there are a few simple rules that we follow, and and this is how we work. So, 2 simple rules. First of all, when you want to optimize something, this I learned in machine learning, you have to clearly define what's your goal, right? You have to define the function you're trying to optimize. Without this, there will be no success. And usually you want to, just because we want to deliver fast, you want to keep solutions simple. So far, 2 simple rules, right? Sounds cool. Now, usually what happens when you start talking to the team about implementing this, you come up with a lot of interesting ideas from engineers how to make it much, much smarter and better and more sophisticated, maybe using latest bleeding edge technology that Google just released in alpha version, etc., etc. So usually when these things started coming, we go back to rule 1 and 2. Does it really solve my problem? If yes, we take it. If not, we throw it away. And does it keep things as simple as possible? If yes, we take it. If not, we throw it away. And the most important part about optimization, well, all of them are most important, all 4 points basically, but you cannot optimize if you don't measure, right? You define a goal, and then you just do things. If you don't know if you arrive to destination or not, you basically will keep going forever. Or will be in the state of false feeling of success. So we always measure everything we are doing. That's why it's also important basically to make sure that your goal is measurable, right? If your goal is not measurable, you will not be able to optimize. So let's start looking what it means for our problem, right? So first of all, when you think about release, usually you just say, what release means, I run regression and I submit, right? And everything is cool. Now, if you define release like this, there is no problem at all. What I described works perfectly because, okay, so running regression I put whole team and all, but let's say in 6 hours they are done, right? And then submission is just few clicks in UI, so it's also easy. So, if we think about release like this, there is nothing we need to do and the problem is not even there. So actually, let's try and define it differently. Release is everything that happens between the date I committed I will submit my application and the day I actually submit the application. All right, so now I can start optimizing this, because basically if you go back to the cycle I described, the main problem was that we commit to day D, and then we start regression a week later, and then maybe we finish regression in a day or two, and everyone can think that regression is fast, but de facto to business and to our people, it looks like we are more than a week late, right? So what we need to optimize basically is the fact that we deliver our features on time, and around this thing we can set a measurable goal. We want a release, which is basically everything that happens from the date we committed to actual submission, take less than 2 days, okay? So with this we are going to our journey, and let's see where it gets us. How am I on time? Okay, I talk too fast. Great. So cool. So first easy win, right? When you think about it, right now you're in regression. You're running your regression. You're discovering that some feature is broken. Okay. So what we did according to the chart I presented before is we stop everything and start fixing the issue. And maybe if we even keep running tests, you can do some small micro optimizations there. You still have to postpone release and create another release candidate, right? Maybe what we can do is say something a little bit different. Why don't we introduce feature flags? Okay, so for every feature I develop, I have a simple Boolean flag in the code, and then if hell breaks loose, instead of spending now 2 days debugging and fixing it, I just shut down the feature and release without it. Okay. I mean, of course, not always business will go with that, but sometimes it's better to release 5 features. Sometimes it's better to release 1 feature less than not release anything, right, on time. So we did this. It's a trivial thing to develop, right? It's a simple framework with hard-coded booleans in code, and your code that like injects, don't injects, whatever you want to do with them, right? It's super easy. Now, it of course it reduces the risk, right, of being late, but it doesn't. First of all, you will probably not. Any sane person will not imagine writing every code change with a flag like this. I mean, today we do this already. I can talk a little bit about it at the end. But back then, when you come to someone and say, yeah, you start moving things here around, maybe it will crash in production, wrap it with feature flag, people will look at you and say, what is wrong with you? I'm just changing the class, leave me alone. Of course, it doesn't solve the hotfixes, right? Because it's still hard-coded in the code. And as I mentioned before, this will involve some arguments with product, right? It's a good technological tool to have, but sometimes whole release is about a feature, so you cannot shut it down. And then if you don't do a good job, you will be late. And even though the simple changes, any changes in code add to regression, right? I mean, this is basically the problem. The whole cycle of changing code and rerunning the regression again, that's what slows you down. So even though you do small changes, you sometimes may be able to sculpt it to partial regression, but usually we'd want to be sure and run full regression. So, anyway, good idea, good start, small step with a very small foot on the screen, but doesn't help enough. Right now, the next step, of course, which is, still an easy win and also almost trivial to develop is you basically say, now I will pull my features from back office. Okay, so, and actually anecdotically, this whole solution was developed on a knee. During one of the war room is when we have a production incident and then team sits in the room and all together debug it until the incident is done. So basically one of these incidents when the team was already just running scripts and waiting, I coded by myself simple back office that has database values with on-off switches, and then later guys picked it up and extended, tested it, and rewrote it properly, right? And also introduced the client-side part, right? So it's something in 2 days of work you can have a beautiful framework where now all of your flags are controlled from the backend. It adds a lot of interesting things, right? First of all, you can now shut down your code even during live release, right? So it means that hotfixes, you probably stopped your hotfixes just by doing 2 days of work. A very good investment to me. And I think by the way, what is also interesting is don't forget that this does add some complexity, because right now, if previously you assumed that features are hard-coded, they're either there or not, now you need to check both options because API can return to you on or off, and you need to make sure that functionality works in both cases, right? So anyway, improvement, but still not where we want to be. By the way, one is interesting thing, this is from a little bit later in history, but I wanted to mention is that the next evolution eventually that happened was that eventually all these feature flags became also experiments, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, right? And we also, to make it a little bit easier to take, to control all the things we're doing, we developed internal application for QA and developers, where basically it's side-by-side application called console, where you can turn it on, and then you can see all the feature flags that you have in your code, all the experiments that you have in your code. You can force certain variants, you can see some information from storage, basically debugging tool, right? So it started initially as debugging tool inside application. Sorry, and on iOS it's still like this, but on Android we already extracted it to separate application. Very nice, very useful tool. And as any cool development, like it was basically initiative from one of the developers. He just decided to take a little bit of time and develop something nice for everyone to make their life easy. But as any experiment like this, we try to catch it early and make sure that we learn from it something. So it's not only useful, but this was also one of our first proof of concepts for using Kotlin. Like it was exactly when we discussed to switch to Kotlin, and we wanted to try it. So this was perfect opportunity to try Kotlin in for production internal, but for production application, and also MVI. I hate these three letters because it's basically like, web developed this pattern like 3 years ago, and Android we discovered it 3 months ago, and it's the biggest hype we have right now in community. But anyway, like it was great experiment to check new architecture and new coding language, right? So you usually try and get as much as you can from every work you're doing. Now, we discussed about simple solutions so far, right? So feature flag, not like, I don't know how many of you do this, but like doesn't sound rocket science. Now I think it's time to admit that we have a problem and start, addressing it. So we need to automate our regression, right? Because what happens is that, at the end, most of the time you spend running tests, right? And ideally in the world of CI/CD, if you run your test while you develop, you probably will not need to rerun again and again during release. So if you want to start fixing problem, you have to start with regression. So we were not that lame. It's not that we didn't have any tests. We had around 150 system tests with Appium. Yes, I have special hate-love relationship with Appium since then. It's a very interesting framework. In one word, I don't know how many of you know, there is a web framework called Selenium. Basically what it does, it allows you to write tests that basically query HTML structure inside the browser through the driver that abstracts web browsers for you, right? So Appium is exactly the same idea, reuses a lot of code. It puts adapter that abstracts allows you to query UI elements on both iOS and Android, and then you can write one test that works on both iOS and Android. Now, it is extremely slow. Because we're talking about 2 years ago when automation tools on iOS were still, I don't know how many of you remember, like the old JavaScript framework, this is what Appium utilized. It was horribly slow, also horribly unstable, and also like from time to time, and I mean like 30% of the time, it couldn't find some elements that you clearly see on the screen, so it was not so great. So everything was very, very flaky, very, very slow, and some of it, by the way, I don't only blame Appium, I blame ourselves, right? We really did shitty job writing good tests there. And the most important part of it is that our tests were basically, how do we say it in nice words, so not good that most of them, we didn't even utilize this beautiful abstraction of having same test written for both platforms, because when iOS and Android separately without talking to each other wrote their UI, they didn't bother to make structure aligned, they didn't bother to make elements aligned. So basically all tests look like line by line, if Android do this, if I else do that, and it was basically horrible, right? It's like 2 tests written in one with exceptions of small differences between platforms, etc. It was a disaster to maintain. So we decided that we need something else, right? Appium was not good for us. Back then we realized that instead of fixing, broken thingy, we probably want to spend longer, like we want to go for a little bit longer effort, like this time marathon. It's really going to be long-term investment. Change the framework, build it correctly, like so that we won't do the same mistakes again, and eventually get a situation where we'll have stable regression. So we decided to choose Espresso and XCTest. We had a lot of discussion. On Android there was no much discussion, like you cannot come to Android guy and offer him to use something outside of Google Bible, so it was easy. Now with the iOS, all solutions were equally horrible back then, and it was just like, I think the first month or whatever when Apple released the XCTest, so in 2016 we start testing UI. As every first product, it was not too stable and there were a lot of issues with it, but alternatives we decided that were maybe longer there, we decided not to use, like Earl Grey, for example. So the biggest discussion there was if we want to use Earl Grey versus exit test. Earl Grey is much more similar to Espresso in the way it works. It also basically, by the way, the goal was to have a black box test, right? We live application, we touch things in UI, and then we check that everything behaves correctly. But exit test does exactly that. Espresso is cheating because it basically creates touches internals of your application and creates something else. So Earl Grey is also cheating. The beauty of cheating is that black box tests are usually a better test in the sense of end-to-end, but they're usually also more flaky with access to internal things. You can cheat and make things more stable. Anyway, long story short, we chose these two. And the cost of it was that right now, if you think about it, previously we are in the world of not so well written, but at least test and spec for iOS and Android is all in one place. We use Cucumber and the code behind it, right? And now we're in a situation where work is doubled, and actually if you think about it, tripled, right? Because you have to have the test spec written somewhere, and then that to make sure that you document what you actually want to test, and then you need to have implementation for this in Espresso and implementation for this in exit test, right? Originally, when we started with this, we said that it's going to be an easy thing to fix. We'll just have some abstraction that looks very similar for both platforms above these two, and the test will basically be beautifully written, almost one-to-one. QA will be opened, or developer will be able to open them side by side and compare. Complete bullshit. We miserably failed on this. Every framework went with its own developments, and no one talked to each other. Basically, this whole thing, today we are starting to be a little bit better in this in Agoda after like a lot of effort spent on this, but 2 years ago for us doing framework that looks exactly or similar even enough on iOS and Android, it was just not speakable. It's like, it's another topic for discussion of how I had to change team structure to address it a little bit, but anyway, we failed. So our test today basically implemented 3 times. One time we have textual text spec, and then we have one-time code in Espresso that since then changed few iteration with beautiful abstraction above Espresso called Cacao developed inside and open sourced. And then we have tests on iOS that look very, very different from test the same thing but look different. Now let's also mention telephone in the room, right? So I mentioned that Appium was very, very slow, right? Like 16 hours to run these poor 100 tests, right? These tools are faster because they're native, but they're not like that faster, right? So at the end, part of the problem is that even if you switch to this native framework and you make it like develop everything together, so you are getting what, like 9 hours of regression, same 100 tests, and you probably like releasing features, so you will increase it all the time. So I do talk too fast, right? Yeah, I'm losing you guys, sorry. So so basically what we had to do for this, this was like hardcore and very, very brave solution. I'm very happy that I was brave enough to take it. We decided we'll build in-house framework that allows us to run parallelize the running of tests, and we basically said that initial target was to finish everything, let's say, less than an hour. So imagine basically I had to take poor 2 iOS developers and 2 Android developers, put them aside for some time and tell them, congratulations guys, from now on you're hardcore backend developers in world of DevOps where no one knows about anything, and you have to build something super complex. I could help them a lot with experiential algorithms and backend system developments, but basically, well, they cheated, they chose Ruby, which is, but anyway, so they managed to develop in-house solution, right? It was different on iOS and on Android, but it's another cool thing we can eventually discuss. It's something very nice. I think on Android, almost all our efforts are documented in articles in Medium, and some of them are open source. If you want to read about this, you are more than welcome. iOS, you can chat to me. I'll explain to you how it works. So there is also like, I invented my own phrase, lion in the room, right? So rewriting this whole test, it's a lot of time. Right, you have 100 tests and you need to add more, and it's not trivial task to go now to business and tell them, congratulations guy, hi Nyaki, congratulations guys, now you have to wait while we develop this amazing parallelization of tests for developers out of your scrums, and we have to now like rewrite whole regression. So my job is to make sure that things like I just said never happen, right? So I have to, business never stops, right? This is like rule number 1 of being director of engineering, business never stops, otherwise no one is paid, so it's very sad, right? So like we had to find solution how to do this in parallel. So here it's more art than than science, and I think what we did, it was eventually, it finished okay, so maybe it was good decision, maybe bad. What we did is, like, imagine what happens right now, right? We're in a situation where every few weeks we run regression, right? And then basically everyone stops and runs regression. So what we said is, okay, from now on, half of developers that run regression, they don't run regression manually. Instead, they develop tests so that the next regression will have less tests to run. Right, so this is what we did, and eventually tests build themselves. Of course, we also said that all new features are written with tests in this framework, right? And as you can imagine as well, there were a few rewrites of this framework, so there was a lot of refactoring involved. But anyway, this way or another, slowly but carefully, we continued. Okay, so a few words about our testing lab. So at the beginning, it looked roughly like this. You see beautiful table. You can move it around. It's like the legs are moving, right? Like few Mac Minis, some poor screen, badge of Danila. He was probably debugging something, and switch a lot of cables, right? And on the right side, you don't see it. Like it's basically in the same room. You have a beautiful rack with phones, with Android phones, right? That at least this is already kind of second iteration. First one, they also were all lying down there around. So this is where we started, right? I'm sorry I don't have recent images, but today our testing lab is a little bit different. We have 40 Android phones, and they're organized in beautiful shelves in multiple rooms, because if you put together so many phones, the Wi-Fi will explode. And then and by the way, yeah, and people around them also will not be able to work, especially on Macs. So there are 80 Mac Minis as well, and now they are not organized on the table like you saw them, like sandwiches around. They're organized in beautiful racks, and each one of them is running 3 simulators, right? So it's basically a farm of simulators, right? And a lot of management work and all the infrastructure behind is now running on Kubernetes cluster, yeah, we also have these things are documented. You can search for them in Medium. We basically managed to auto provision. We managed to create a situation where when you don't have enough phones, you can run emulators for your needs. And the way we did is our crazy guru managed to, whose name is Anton, managed to basically create a Docker that runs Android inside. I don't know how many of you know what is Docker. It's very popular to talk about these things in science, but in client guys. But basically, imagine that you can run command that sends spawns for me wherever 60 Android devices of this and this version, and then in a minute you just have all of these guys running for you. It's amazing. Yeah, and of course lots of reporting. As I mentioned, we are freaks of measuring things. Some of our reports are inaccurate, and then you have to rework them because you discover bugs, and then you understand that they optimize wrong thing, etc. But anyway, a lot of cool things are happening today in our farm. I think it's really like one of the more interesting, since it's developed in-house mostly, this is one of the more complex things that we developed. I think, sadly, by far way more complex than our UI. Anyway, so things we're working on farm right now going forward. So we want to have unified framework. As I mentioned originally, we have different solutions for iOS and Android. We want to unify as much as we can there. Over time, we developed a lot of interesting optimization algorithms to run tests in a smarter way. And right now, we want to put it in one place because we just don't want to maintain same thing 2 times. It harms us everywhere, right? So we want to unify it. It's almost finished. And this is project we developed open source since the beginning. So if you want to search for Marathon, you can start reading and joining the effort. For us, one of the biggest challenges with OS 6 is that these machines are just not dedicated for server rooms. So we need to find some solution to scale our farm, right? Right now, if we need to update text code, it's basically the day I lose my sleep, right? It's horrible. Like go to whatever 80 machines and change something manually because almost of automation tools don't work. Anyway, it's something where we have a creative solution for, of course, one of our main problems with UI tests is they're flaky, like everyone's problem with UI tests. So we are trying to think about good solutions there to help you debug your UI test using the farm, so get results faster, etc. Right, and something we just play with, it's the Faraday cage. For those who don't know, Faraday cage is a cage that blocks RF signals. So basically the idea is that if you have too many devices that communicate over Wi-Fi, they start jamming each other. So you want to create boxes where they're basically independent, and then you hopefully can put more of them closer, because otherwise we start already optimizing for how many phones to put on which floor. And in general, in our floor, it's a problem because there are tons of mobile devices around, right? So it's jamming each other. Anyway, going back to the story, right? So 6 months later, we are in a situation where we have feature flags and most regression is automated. We managed to do it, but the problem is still not solved. What happens in the team? So huge amount, basically imagine how teams work, right? And I mean, what would you do, right? You'll probably do the same. You know that release is coming, and we all work in sprints, right? So everyone starts basically, what do? You say, my sprint goal is to finish the story, and then all teams do that, and by then we'll probably have around 6 teams already, not 2 or 3 like we had at first, right? So like all teams basically come and say, I am finishing my feature, most important feature on which I worked for the last 3 weeks, and then I submitted whatever, day before the release, I try to merge my PR and start running regression. And then my QA, of course, discover bugs, so I need to do all these small fixes. So basically imagine that your workflow looks like this. Nothing happens for a week, your GitHub is sleeping, and then suddenly everything explodes and everything tries to merge like whatever, tens of PRs in one day, and regression still takes around like 40-50 minutes, so it's totally not trivial, and everyone starts waiting for everyone. People stay, like people come early, people come late. We had one guy who was merging at 2 a.m. Anyway, so it was very, very bad, and at the end, de facto what happened is that on the release day, we never could have started release because everyone comes and says, listen, dude, I worked on it for 3 weeks, like, and you just need to wait for my PR. And there are 4 teams like this, so eventually we spend at least a day or 2 just waiting for all of these things to merge. There was some also nice tricks to try and create release branch before, but it was a huge shit that we killed. Thank you, Leonid. So, I think, as you can see, by the way, this is why it's this is a great example of why it's very important to focus on to define well the problem that you're trying to optimize. Because if you would come and say that my problem is that I don't have automated regression, you would finish here and your problem didn't solve at all, right? You're still in a situation where release still takes 4 days, right? But if you define problem correctly and you say that actually what I care about is releasing on time, that the fact that you added coolest technology and developed in-house farm and all of this is awesome, but if it doesn't solve your problem, you still understand that you failed, right? So though developers are of course very happy because there are tons of awesome things on the way, but business-wise and also that's how we try to teach our developers to think engineering-wise, your problem is not solved, so you're not done. Yep, by the way, the biggest issue with this is that it was impossible to stop this loop where you come and say, listen, dude, okay, I understand that your PR is not finished, but like just push it next release, what's your problem? But then the problem is that because all releases are late, no one trusts the release day. They say, no, dude, you say it will be in 2 weeks, but actually we all know it's gonna be in 4. I have to merge now, otherwise I'm missing my KPI, etc., 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 right? It was really, really challenging, and yet another time where I had to do type decision, right? So this time we solved it by changing the process. This is usually what I do. This is my responsibilities. So first of all, I had to forbid postponing release for a feature. So from now on, if you wanted to just wait another minute for your PR, you have to come to me, explain why it's end of the world and why all other teams have to wait for you. Helped a little bit. I'll explain in a moment where it failed. And another thing we decided to do is to prevent this spike day before release. We basically said all scrums cannot start and finish on the same day. We realigned them a little bit so that there will be stories that merge in through whole week, and not everyone is just aligning so that they will have extra 3 days before release. And another thing we noticed is that there is really no need for people, unless they really like it for some strange reason, to stay overnight or early in the morning to merge their stuff just because there is no one else running PRs back then. We decided that we need to develop a tool that will allow us automatically merge stuff. And then, though, like, let's admit basically that regression is slow, but at least if I put it in a queue and it automatically merges itself, robot can merge it instead of people at night, right? And this is basically, I think, what we did. So, by the way, I also said something else that we decided to edit around there, additional KPI, is that we wanted to make sure that we have periodical releases, right? Because now when you come and say, releases are no longer bound for product features, right? So it's the first thing. Basically, I say, if your feature is not ready, I still release. We had to redefine our releases, and then we switched to periodicals, right? Back then, it was basically very popular to release around every 2 weeks, bi-weekly, and that's what we did, right? Sometimes we just copy the big boys. That's how we started. Now, let's say a few words about the merge bot. How am I? And 40. Okay. Cool. So MergeBot, if you think about it, it's a very simple tool. Nothing Node.js cannot handle. Basically develop one open PR. Once PR is reviewed, instead of by yourself going to TeamCity, running your tests and then clicking merge button, you just put a label in your PR. Bot picks it up. You wait in queue. I mean, your PR waits in queue, and then eventually what bot does, it rebases your PR with the latest version of develop, runs all tests. If tests are green, great success, we merge your PR. If tests are red, you notify developer that something went wrong, developer fixes, and here you go again. Okay, yet another tool that very cool guy who is, I don't know why, but really likes JavaScript, and he developed it, I think, in just like maybe a week. Very nice. we're almost there, right? Like we have automated bot, it merges things, and like it goes on. So overall things kind of fixing themselves more or less. We have stable bi-weekly releases, but as you can, like we managed to get a situation where roughly maybe 80% of them finish in 2 days, and another 20% dragging along, right? So after 2 quarters, we had another quarter of improvements, and then basically we saw that for the last whatever 2-3 months, we're staying flat. We're constantly in this situation where we don't hit the KPI, and we also not really where we want to be, and we don't have any improvements. No one knows what to do, or maybe knows but just doesn't do, right? And then by the way, another thing worth mentioning is that releases, though 80% of them finish in less than 2 days, most of them take exactly 2 days. Basically, I mean that we were not in situation where sometimes you finish in an hour and sometimes you finish in 2.5 days. We were almost always barely scratching 2 days and sometimes even more, right? And this was, as I said, not going anywhere. Also, we were in a situation where regression was still painful because all of QA and lots of developers were involved in regression, right? So it's still a lot of work, like quarter of week. But basically every 2 week, half of week team stops, right? It's not great. And I'm here listing out other issues during releases. So usually we had around 2 to 3 and sometimes even more release candidates per release, which basically shows that we discover issues late, right? And like usually what it means is that you either don't run tests or don't follow good practices, or your tests are very flaky and then you force merge, and then at the end, just before release, you don't have a choice, so you start fixing all the things that you missed, right? So what we did is, yet another time for a tough decision, okay? So this one maybe will surprise you a little bit. So it's time maybe to change the goal, right? So, but it's not just to say, you know what, our goal is actually where we are. Like it's not, you're not cheating by saying, I'm just gonna release within 2 days and a half, and this is my goal, right? It's, I think, time to do a little bit drastical measure. I said, guys, let's change the pace. Let's switch to, release every week. Okay, this is what everyone told me basically, right? So they come and say, dude, it takes us half week to release every 2 weeks. You want us to switch to weekly releases? What is wrong with you? Like, what I had to explain to them is the motto of life, no pain, no gain. And the idea is, like, if I need to explain my decision, what happened there basically is that I was concerned by the stagnation where for a quarter nothing was improving. Basically, we got to like status quo where people don't follow process. That's why we suck, and no one cares. And overall, we're like almost hitting KPI, and everyone says, yeah, almost is like always. The bonus is going to be okay, no problem there, right? So you have to a little bit escalate and make sure that the problem, like rises higher. So that people will start thinking again how to introduce like creative solutions to this one. Actually, once we did that, it worked out like a charm. And the beauty of it, I think, is that it's also something you guys should remember, is that we didn't have to develop any new technologies to solve this. So basically, if you think about it, we were in a situation where we didn't hit our goal. We developed a lot of tools. Something was not working right. And then we get the situation where we almost nailed the problem, and we didn't have to write any line of code for that. So I'll tell you what we did. First of all, we enforced following the process, right? One of the problems was that, for example, people actually cheated and constantly pushed last moment changes to PR because it's from their team, because it's from their friend, wherever. And then this was adding like extra release candidates and extra days to regression. By the way, one of the reasons I chose 1 day is because if you think about 2-day window, let's say you're release manager, you're saying following thing. Okay, in the morning, there will be bugs and reruns anyway, right? So why should I create release candidate early in the morning of Monday? I'll wait for my friend to merge. It's still Monday, afternoon. It's okay. And then Monday evening, and then MergeBot just does another one. And then we like QA will find something manually. One team still didn't finish a test, so I'll merge another feature. When you set it to 1 day and you have to submit, let's say at the end of the day, you don't have time to do all this shit. You understand that if you don't submit at the end of the day, you failed. So no more, sorry, can you wait another 2 hours for my bot? Because 2 hours is almost like 30% of your time, right? So it's impossible to do. Another thing we did is we stopped rotating release managers. We tried to make it easier on our people, and we said that release manager is ongoing duty, where every week there is another guy, and he talks to previous guy, and then they explain what were the problems, and hopefully we'll have passing knowledge around. So all of this is of course bullshit, because as we know, developers don't talk to each other really. So like problems were reappearing in release week after week until someone suddenly says, guys, we discussed it a month ago, why are we still doing this mistake? Why? Because we forgot to mention it to the next guy, etc. Right? So one manager for both platforms, by the way. This was the big game change. All knowledge was in one head. He was responsible for this, and he had to kick ass, right? Now, another simple thing that worked out like a charm was to introduce lessons learned for every release. If after every release you talk what went well and what didn't go well, and then release manager, the one single guy who has all the knowledge is there, he can make sure that these things, he drives it, and he can make sure that things actually improve, and it also worked like a charm. And of course, going back to no gain, no pain, so one of the problem is flaky tests. Now, who develops the tests? In our team, it's developers. But usually what we were doing is that during regression, when tests are flaky, QA were running the release. So they're the one who reran tests that are flaky. And we got a situation where developers basically don't have any interest whatsoever to invest into quality of tests. They write them, and then some other people debug them for them by doing a lot of manual labor. So we changed that. We said from now on, owner of the test is the one who reruns it manually if it fails during regression. As you may guess, developers don't like running tests manually, so very fast we started to see improvements in our regression because people were running the test manually in 2 minutes, and then they spend another hour just to fix the test so that it never happens again, because it's really like not cool to run tests manually. So it worked out really nicely. And of course, like, a little bit of motivation, like fear of not getting bonus, and a little bit of hugs, so it all worked out nicely. I think eventually the story looks like this. So as you can see in Q4, end of the last year, we still were in like 2+ days on average a month. And then in Q1, you can see huge drop even just in January, right? So we switched to all of these things in 1st of January this year. And basically after 3 bad releases, it works like a charm. We almost immediately got to release within a day. And then in February, we already said, oh, we hit our KPI, what do we do? And the answer is, you set more aggressive KPI, right? So we switched to target hours. And then we, as you can see, like, we're now in a situation where end of like 2 months ago, we were on average already releasing within 2 hours. And last month, like, trust me on this one, we already released, unless some problems, like eventually you have here and there bad release, right? Something comes up, but usually hour and a half and we are done, right? So this is the story. Now, last few slides, right? Automation is fun, it's cool, and it's very interesting to write code. Maybe not that interesting when your success is actually measured, because then instead of just doing cool things, you actually have to make sure that you solve problems. Developers hate that for some reason. But the automation, a lot of automation, it has its disadvantages, right? Like, as I mentioned, think about it, you have 1,000 UI tests, right? And it's like they all finish in 30 minutes, right? You click a button and you have a result in 30 minutes. Like, frankly, like it's the time that it takes to run unit test on our machine, right? So like your regression runs today same time as it's unit test. By the way, it says both bad things about both of them. They should both finish in 10 minutes or 5 minutes, right? But the math is not with you here. You have 1,000 tests, they're UI tests, they're always flaky. And if you have, like, let's say even 20 tests that are failing 1 in 100 times, you start having issues where, one failed test, your build failed, right? You cannot merge, right? So statistics is not with you here. These numbers drop really fast. You can do the math. And then we are in a situation where with just like whatever, 5 flaky tests, you suddenly only 70% of the time your test pass, right? It's very, very not cool. This is our big fight right now. Of course, there is a cheat by adding retries to the tests, and we're doing that, and we still have problems, right? But what we are doing right now, by the way, for this, we track both raw runs without retries and attempts. So we merge with retries, but we try to look on the problem as if we don't do retries. So basically, developers have to fix all flaky tests, even though they pass with the retry, right? This is what we started doing. It helped a lot. But here you can see graph. By the way, Grafana, I hope all of you know it. Like, this is query from Elasticsearch. This is how we do this part of tracking, at least. We show shares of PRs that merge. Green means first attempt, yellow means second attempt, and we are not in a good place, right? The orange line means that we want to be, we want green to be at 70, and it's not right now not even close, right? So this is our next big fight. My last slide, almost, I promise. What's next for us in this area, right? So first of all, today, it's not a number I'm proud of, so I won't mention it on stage, but it's many hours of merging queue today, right? Today we have a lot of PRs and they wait in queue, and queue is really filled with reruns because, as I mentioned before, we have a lot of issues with stability. So people wait for a long time to merge. And I define this horrible developer experience, right? I want to be in the world. I would want to be my developers to be proud of their work, and it means that if they click I want to merge, let's say within an hour or two, the PR should be merged. It cannot be, you cannot be in a situation where you have got time to go home or even like sleep, you know, it's not cool. So we want to improve stability of our tests, and we want to switch to more sophisticated merge bot. It's also developed inside Agoda that allows you to squeeze many PRs together in a smart way, and then though it spends more resources, it allows you to merge much more PRs in the same faster, right? We want to automate a release management tool. There is a lot of mechanical work in release today because, like, if you imagine it's a checklist that you heavily optimize every release every week with lessons learned, right? So something we want to automate completely to remove people there from doing mistakes. But to be super frank with you, since this problem like works okay, like 1 hour doesn't justify. Let's say I have bigger fish to fry than making it a little bit easier to release than today, right? And that's why it's there. We'll eventually do it, but I wouldn't say that it's top priority today to address, right? So not always the best thing you need to do is automation. And of course, better test, right? Like better test. This is like where we want to be. Once you add a lot of automation, it becomes really easy to write tests. Tests start growing really fast, the amounts, and then the quality is usually hard to control. And we still, like, I don't think anyone managed to do it, so neither did we manage to build great framework that completely prevents you from doing stupid mistakes. So tests are flaky, and it's a struggle, and we are going back and forth on it. But there are a few things we're going to do strategically. First of all, we want to modularize the application. We want to split our application in models. It solves us 2 problems. First problem is that today, our code base is so huge, it takes around 10 minutes to compile on each platform from scratch, right? And even with cache, like 2 minutes. We don't want to wait for this. We want people to have great experience where when I develop just 1 page of application, I have a flavor, we call it, of application that has just this page, and I compile in like exactly 2 seconds, and I change this page, and when it's done, I just I'm done with it, and the tests run for whole application or for flavors as well. If I have such flavors, I can also start thinking about running tests only for these flavors, right? So maybe right now, if I have a lot of logic I want to test on Booking.From, instead of going to Booking.From through 50 screens, I can basically run a flavor of Booking.From, test 80% of features on this flavor, and then just do only 20% of tests end-to-end with full integration, right? So basically what I'm explaining now is we can start building proper pyramid of testing and hopefully switch from 1,000 UI tests to, let's say, 200, 300 UI tests, a lot of UI tests that are integration that are much less flaky. And maybe over time, it also, by the way, helps us with the strategy of adding more and more funnels to the application, which is something interesting going on in the company. Of course, we can also start talking about like optimizations there. It's all in consideration to say that if I changed only 1 model, maybe I need to run only end-to-end test and test of this model, and also this way reduce flakiness. But anyway, a lot of work, a lot of thought, and even some work is going on in this area right now. And I think, that's it. So I will not take any questions now, but if you want to discuss anything, and as I said, I can almost everything that I said, I can discuss up to code level, and if not me, there are people here that can discuss with you definitely to code level. But I was part of design many of these things, so we can talk, and I'll gladly share and learn from you as well. So see you at the booth, and thank you again for having me. Really proud to